Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremiah Roberts, one of the co-hosts here at Cultish.
And it's the Super Sleuth right here with him.
Since we started 5 years ago, our goal and mission here at Cultish is to be able to bless and equip you to be able to use the gospel proclamation to counter the kingdom of the cults. It's also been a goal of ours to make this a 100% crowd-funded ministry. And as we are redirecting our focuses on that, we ask that you prayerfully consider supporting our ministry. We currently, if you've noticed, we haven't been able to drop episodes as much as we'd like to. We've maybe been doing a once a month. One of the primary reasons being is that right now we are only around 10 to 15% of monthly support of what we need to operate as a ministry. This is very important. It's near and dear to Andrew and I's heart. So we'd ask that if you have been blessed by the content the last 5 years, if you want to support Cultish, that we can continue this very, very important ministry, please prayerfully consider partnering with us. And we ask that you'd also would consider giving generously to the cultishtshow.com. There is a donate tab where you can make sure that everything we do will be 100% crowd-funded. And that way we can avoid a paywall to make sure that you and everyone else, and especially those who are cult survivors, can get these necessary resources for free. So please go to thecultishtshow.com and please prayerfully consider partnering with us. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome back, guys, to our deep dive on Under the Banner of Heaven, all things Mormonism, early history, you name it, just all over the place, really.
Mm-hmm. Even some things that aren't true.
Even some things that are not true. Take a look and see what you can find out is true or not true. Do your own research, right? But we're so thankful to have you here with us again. Thank you so much. If you are watching us, thank you for supporting us. This would not be possible without you guys. But before we... No, let's just go right into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go right into it. So where did we end? We ended with the first vision account, right?
We ended just talking about what the official version as it exists today actually says.
Perfect. What was a short summary, really, of the last episode, too?
So in the last episode, we covered the environment in which Joseph Smith was reared, and that included things like the magic worldview and the Second Great Awakening, which was very flamboyant, but didn't have like a biblical center to it. And so people were tossed about by every wave of doctrine, as the Bible says. And the end result is a lot of people who are looking for some kind of grounding, for somebody to tell them this is what's true, and then back it up by some kind of esoteric spiritual experience.
And there jumps in Joseph Smith.
Exactly. Amongst a whole lot of other people, as we have mentioned before, and you're going to see as we go throughout this series, there wasn't really anything terribly unique about what Joseph Smith was actually teaching. I think the main reasons for why Mormonism still exists today come down to things that he did and that others did around him. Whereas, there wasn't really anything unique about like saying that, there were two major groups of Native Americans that fought against each other, Israel. I mean, the Worldwide Church of God, Herbert W. Armstrong was a British Israelist. There's all sorts of that kind of stuff that's totally unoriginal. And it's just this kind of collage, this random hodgepodge of different things. So we went over Joseph Smith's early life, a little bit about his family connections with the occult, or probable connections. And then we ended up with the official version of the first vision. And I'm not going to read the whole thing again. If you want to read all of it yourself, this is found in the Documentary History of the Church, Volume 1, as well as it's in the Pearl of Great Price under Joseph Smith History. And it goes over the first vision as well as the visions concerning the coming of the Book of Mormon.
Ooh, real quick. I love this because the first vision is what you can always take an LDS person to if they tell you,
yeah,
well, what's wrong? We're Christian too. Why do you have an issue with me. Well, I go, what does it say at the beginning of the Book of Mormon? Like on one of the pages, it literally says, I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. And the personage who addressed me said that all their creeds were an abomination in his sight, that those professors were all corrupt, that they were near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They teach for doctrines the commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. Literally, I'll remind them of that. Like, that's what Joseph says. That's what you are to believe.
Yeah.
You're not a Christian.
Exactly. And I think that speaks to a difference in the attitude of modern day Mormonism versus original Mormonism. Original recipe Mormonism was very bold. It was, I don't want to say straightforward, because there was a lot of confusion over what was supposed to be taught and all that kind of stuff. But, when you read what Brigham Young said, there's really no question as to what he was getting at, and he wasn't mincing words. Similarly, a lot of the things that Joseph Smith were like that, though. He would occasionally just straight up lie about some things, but we'll get into that later. But yeah, I think in modern Mormonism, really intellectually, apologetically, Mormonism has been torn to shreds. And the modern Mormon has to find some way of dealing with that. So they tend towards theological liberalism. And what I mean by that is this, and this is just sort of how I categorize things. Every organized religion has basically three sources of authority. You're going to have some kind of revelation, and then you're going to have teachers, and then you're going to have boots on the ground. So for us as Christians, we have the Bible, and then we have pastors or Bible teachers, and then we have just random church members. In fundamentalism, that revelation is supposed to be the foundation of everything else that you believe.
Right.
So for Islam, that foundation typically is going to be the Quran and the Hadith, which is traditions about Muhammad's life and the teachings that he gave that weren't necessarily from God, but they sort of treat it like the Gospels, basically. And so you end up with fundamentalist Islam that looks very much like the life and culture that Muhammad lived in. In Christianity, I would consider myself to be a fundamentalist Christian because at very least I am trying to have the Bible itself be the foundation of everything that I believe and everything that I do. When it comes to Mormonism, I think fundamentalism gets you into all sorts of different problems, which we're going to get into later. But then liberalism, though, theological liberalism is when you kind of flip the script and you put the average boots on the ground as your own personal self as the arbiter of truth.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you lean towards, let's say, in terms of Mormonism, as modern day revelation and prophets, you can't necessarily have a fundamentalism because the foundation is always changing.
Yeah, well, in Mormonism, there is this idea of personal revelation, but for fundamentalist Mormons, that can get to be a little bit tricky. I think if you try to the way that they do things in fundamentalism in Mormonism is they go back to what Joseph Smith originally taught, and then they sort of join their own prophet's teachings to that, in a sense. It's a little bit like how in Catholicism they have the Bible, but they also have, on that same level, the church magisterium and the creeds and all that kind of stuff. And so in fundamentalist Mormonism, it's a similar kind of thing. You have what Joseph Smith originally taught, and depending on which group, that might also include what Brigham Young taught and John Taylor and all these other groups. And then you also have whatever modern day prophet it is, Prophet Onias or somebody like that. And so you do end up with that kind of fundamentalism of this revelation being the foundation of everything else. But for mainstream Mormonism, in order to deal with the amount of criticism and just evidence against what they believe, they have to go to theological liberalism, where they can just reject certain things or ignore things or whatever. And it's just, I have received this confirmation about the church, and it doesn't really matter what you bring to the table. It doesn't matter the criticisms that you have against the Book of Abraham and things like that. I just don't know how to answer those questions, but I have this experience. I felt the Spirit, and that's all that matters. And that kind of approach to things is completely foreign to early Mormonism. Like Oliver Cowdery didn't live like that. Martin Harris, maybe sort of. He was kind of an oddball. We'll get into that in a minute, but Brigham Young didn't live like that. None of these guys, for the most part, really did, because they felt so strongly that it really was intellectually true and defensible.
Well, and it was also bound to the fundamentalism of the real revelation that they were having then and there.
Yeah.
They were mouthpieces, oracles for God. When they spoke as a prophet, it wasn't like modern day where there's general conferences and stuff like that. It was literally like the prophet is speaking. This is doctrine. This is what we believe. That was the foundation for that time.
And that's actually one of the things that I find really difficult to understand about sort of the Mormon perspective, is that you have a prophet right now. Russell M. Nelson is the current prophet and president of the church. I would bet money that by the time he dies, he will not have given any prophecy or revelation whatsoever. How do I know that? Because a vast majority of Mormon prophets have lived and died without giving any new revelations. Even in, say, Doctrine and Covenants, which is one of the works of Mormon scripture, it has, I believe, 138 sections, and 136 of them came from Joseph Smith. One of them came from Brigham Young. I forget what the other one was from. But you don't have like Gordon B. Hinckley giving new revelation. You don't have Thomas Monson doing that, both of whom are relatively recent prophets. And so I don't get, like, what is the point of having prophets and apostles who are supposed to give new revelation, but they don't do it? The prophet is identified under the titles prophet, seer, revelator, translator, and president of the church. But since Joseph Smith, you have at least very few of the Mormon prophets who have attempted to do any of those things other than to be the president.
Do you think maybe, in a sense, speculating before we get back into some history here, because it's always awesome to speculate about these things, maybe it's because they've divorced themselves from the magic worldview from which they once lived? Like, I think Joseph Smith may well have had communication with something otherworldly. Do I think it was from God? No. Why do I think it wasn't from God? Why? Because it contradicts what the Bible says. So I can entertain the fact. I'm not saying maybe. Yeah. I'm saying maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
Well, that's a common theory, especially with the first vision. Is maybe Joseph Smith did have some kind of spiritual or supernatural experience, but it wasn't. The Holy Spirit is not the only spirit. So he could have been interacting with somebody else. That is a commonly held belief.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do I know, regardless of what he said or where it came from isn't true? Number one, it contradicts previous revelation. The Holy Spirit doesn't contradict himself.
Yeah.
So what's interesting enough, though, is maybe these modern Mormon prophets aren't actually doing the things that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young maybe did.
Well, that's certainly a possibility. I kind of lean away from the idea that Joseph Smith was really having supernatural experiences. Although, honestly, when you start getting into occultic practices,
he absolutely was.
Yeah, well, I mean, he had a talisman on his body when he died.
And that's from the Magus.
Yeah,
it's straight up occultic.
Yeah, he was definitely involved in a lot of that kind of stuff, and I think there's, I don't know a whole lot about like demonology and that kind of stuff, but I do think that when you start playing with fire, you can end up getting burned pretty bad.
Yeah.
So that's at least on the table as far as possibilities go. I wouldn't go that far as far as the first vision is concerned for reasons that we'll get into in a minute. But
okay.
I wonder if it comes down to Brigham Young, because Joseph Smith, as a rule, he was giving out revelations left, right, and center, especially during the Kirtland period, which is about 1831 to 38.
That's Ohio.
Yes. Kirtland is in Ohio. Good job.
Thank you.
Do you want this sticker?
Yes.
Yeah, he was doing that a lot at the beginning, and then over time he realized that he was sort of getting into trouble. So we were like the first half of Doctrine and Covenants is all Kirtland period, But I think he started doing that a lot, and he sort of toned it down a little bit towards the end. But one of the differences between Joseph Smith and Brigham Young is that Young almost never gave revelations. I think it just wasn't part of how he operated. He was very much a leader and an administrator. He wasn't this flamboyant supernaturalist that I think Joseph Smith was, and that a lot of the people in Joseph Smith's congregation wanted him to be.
Right.
What people wanted from Brigham Young is like, can you help us survive out here? Can you help us get there and then survive, and then help us deal with the government coming in and all that kind of stuff? Like, they didn't necessarily need for him to, on a weekly basis, come out and give new revelations. And I don't think he felt like he had a need to, because a lot of cult leaders, frankly, they will go to Revelation in order to make sure that people do what they want them to.
Right.
Brigham Young didn't really need to do that. He was just a good leader. I mean, he was a terrible human being, but he was good at getting people to go along with what he needed them to do. And so I just don't think he felt the need for that. And I think he sort of set the tone for how things would go from there on out.
Gotcha. So what about like the Adam God doctrine and stuff? You wouldn't refer to that as being revelation from Brigham Young?
I don't think so.
Just more doctrine that he took from teachings of Joseph Smith, or what?
I think what happened with that is Joseph Smith, to a large extent, would he would come up with new doctrines or new ideas or whatever, and then he, in a lot of cases, would just leave things behind. He would say something in a sermon and then forget about it because it wasn't coming from God, and there was no canon
right
by which to base everything. So he might say something in 1831 and then just never think about it again, and it just disappears because he's not really talking about it anymore. And I think with the Adam God doctrine, I think something similar happened where he had said something to the effect that, and by the way, the Adam God doctrine is the idea that the Adam of the book of Genesis is actually the God of the Bible, which you'll recognize immediately as being complete and utter nonsense. And the church to this day completely rejects that theory. I want to make that clear. Official Mormon doctrine is that this is not true, but Brigham Young did teach it.
Yeah, I mean, Warren Jeffs teaches it too.
Oh, yeah, and I have no idea. Even with the additions that Joseph Smith made to the book of Genesis with the book of Moses, I have no earthly idea.
Oh, the book of Moses. Okay, I thought you were going to refer to this bad boy right here.
That's the one that I have. This guy was over here saying, oh, well, I have a Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, like a full one. And I was like, man, I feel so bad because all I have is the one that's just a comparison of changes that Joseph Smith made with how it reads in the original. And then here he is with the exact same copy. Did you get that from Sandra Tanner?
Yeah.
This guy's unbelievable. You guys have no idea.
I have no.
The things I have to put up with.
That's so funny. Okay. So let's get back into where we were, where we ended.
Yeah. Okay. So we ended up talking about the first vision and the official version. Now we keep saying it's the official version because there are other versions, and there are a lot of problems with this first version. Again, I'm not going to read through the whole thing because, as you're undoubtedly noticing just from the overview that I did in the last episode, this guy just loved words. He was incredibly verbose. And I pity the poor Mormon missionaries that have to memorize a lot of this stuff. Like, my goodness, my heart goes out to you for a variety of reasons, including that one. But just to hit some of the points, the major points of how this story develops. First, there was said to be a major revival in the area of Palmyra, where Joseph Smith lived at the time. This took place in 1820 when he was 14 years old. That he was a very devout, spiritually minded kind of person, but not grounded in the local church, really. He was looking for a denomination to join and was very confused. Then he came to James chapter 1, verse 5, which says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. That he had this weird spiritual experience where like he was overcome by this evil darkness, and then it was like an almost literal like light shining down that broke the darkness, and the darkness went away. And at that point, he saw two personages, the Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. You'll notice the more time you spend with Mormonism, Heavenly Father is like a name, not a description. So Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. And then once this is revealed to him, Smith takes the opportunity to ask his question, which of these churches should I join? The response is, I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. And the personage who addressed me said that all their creeds were an abomination in his sight, that those professors were all corrupt, that they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They teach for doctrines the commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. So before we get into some of the problems, let's assume for a minute that this story is true. Already, Mormonism is off to a bad start. People who study Mormonism at first will start to ask, like, why is Mormonism, their story, so different from everybody else? Even though, as you said, like Joseph Smith was growing up in an environment where all sorts of people were claiming to be prophets. All sorts of people were saying, oh, the Christianity has been corrupted and I can restore true original Christianity, what Jesus really taught. So like, what's the difference? I think that last bit is one of the big differences right off the bat, because not only are they admitting that the Bible has been corrupted, which it would be necessary in order for this to be the case. If the Bible wasn't corrupted, then the answer to the problem is not, well, we need new revelation, but we need the old revelation. We need to go back to the Bible. So the fact that they're saying here that we need to go to new revelation is an implicit affirmation of the corruption of the Bible. But he wasn't just saying that these doctrines were changed. He went so far as to say their professors were all corrupt. That's personal, because what he's saying there is if you teach Orthodox Christianity, as we do, that there is corruption in you. And actually, for a time during their temple ceremony, the temple ceremony involved this kind of play that was acted out by all these actors that were working in the temple. There was a part of that play where somebody would portray a Christian pastor who is tempted by the devil to change their doctrines in exchange for money. This is no longer the case. This has been changed, thankfully, both because they got rid of the actors and replaced it with like a video or something, but also because a lot of people now know Christian pastors and know that that's not really true. I cannot understand somebody meeting our pastor Wade and thinking, oh yeah, this guy's super corrupt.
Right.
Just the humblest, nicest guy in the world, super sincere. And how he puts up with us, I have no idea. But I think that sort of changed that. But in this first vision, that sentiment that if you teach Orthodox Christian doctrine, you are doing so for nefarious reasons. That really put people on edge right off the bat. Again, if the story is true. But now you can see where we're going. I don't think for one second that this ever happened. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for us to believe that.
With the first vision?
Yeah, I don't think it took place. There are a number of Christians who, as we were talking about before, believe that Joseph Smith had some kind of spiritual experience.
Or he could have. Maybe
Could have.
maybe it didn't even happen within the first vision.
Maybe not. I think Fawn Brody, who wrote "No Man Knows My History," which is one of the two definitive biographies of Joseph Smith's life. My goodness, she theorized that Smith may have had a dream at one point, and then as time went on, his memory of that dream started to change.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that's what happened, but there's a lot of different possibilities.
Yeah, get into it. Why do you think this didn't occur?
So, for one thing, one of the claims that he made was that he was very spiritually minded as a 14-year-old. Later on, and this happened various times, but later on, somebody went around collecting affidavits from people in Palmyra who knew the Smith family and who knew Joseph Smith. And mainly he was looking for affirmations that the Smith family was involved in money digging, which we'll get into in a minute, but it's a magical practice. And so he went around looking for all these affidavits, and all these people like knew the Smith family, or they knew Joseph Smith in particular. And their uniform testimony was that he really was not particularly spiritually minded as a teenager. And that's the sort of thing that would stand out. I mean, I've done a lot of youth ministry kind of stuff, and honestly, it's frustrating when you're trying to get people to care about spiritual stuff, and they don't. So it stands out when there's somebody who really is very spiritually sensitive.
But I mean, he was also in the opposite direction as biblically spiritually sensitive. He was in occult practices.
Right. So he was engaged in stuff that was prohibited by the scriptures.
So do you think people would confuse that as being spiritual back then?
Spiritual in a sense, but not spiritual in the way that Joseph Smith describes himself.
Gotcha.
So it's like when somebody today says, well, I'm spiritual, but not religious.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm not going to confuse this person for Orthodox Christianity.
Right. Romans 8 says you're carnal, not spiritual.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and how are you going to be spiritual without, one of the things that really bothers me is when people say, oh, Christianity is a relationship, not a religion. And I'm like, I can sort of understand where you're coming from. However, how do you have a relationship with somebody without believing specific things about them, or having rituals where you get to know them better and things like that? Like, how do you do any of that as somebody who has a relationship with somebody? Well, all of that stuff is what a religion is, And so anyways, I think Smith was spiritual in that he did believe in occultic stuff. He was no naturalist yet, but he did believe in all sorts of spiritual powers and things like that. Yeah, he wasn't like somebody who was really spiritually attuned, who was searching for the truth, or who was wanting to be faithful to the scriptures and faithful to God. Like, that's not the kind of spirituality that you see there. Also, another issue was that there was no revival in Palmyra in 1820.
It didn't happen.
It just straight up didn't happen. So one of the ways that we know that is because church membership was recorded in those days. And as a rule, every time there was a major revival in an area, church membership would go up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is according to Mormonism Research Ministry. It's on their website. They say, there's plenty of additional evidence that the revival referred to by Lucy Smith, who, by the way, is Joseph Smith's mother, did occur during the winter of 1824 to 25. It was reported in at least a dozen newspapers and religious periodicals. The church records show outstanding increases due to the reception of new converts. The Baptist Church received 94, the Presbyterian 99, while the Methodist work grew by 208.
Wow, I wonder how many of that 99 for the Presbys was babies.
Probably. They wouldn't know.
Sorry.
If you're Presbyterian, we love you, but we will make fun of you. But then they go on to say, no such revival bringing in great multitudes occurred in 1820. That is a big deal. That's kind of an obvious thing. Like, why, if it was something, if it was a great religious excitement like what Joseph Smith describes, why are the records so stagnant?
Right.
This is describing something that happened in the mid 1820s, which.
So here's like one thought. So Joseph Smith then in his journal was not writing it down as it occurred.
Right. So one of the things that makes Joseph Smith unique, and why I said earlier that it's what he did and not so much what he taught that made him unique, is that at a very early point in the early 1830s, he started to make a record of his ministry and of his life. And so the official version that we have right now came, I believe, in 1838.
Okay. 18 years after the first vision.
Yeah, after it was supposed to happen. But that brings up another issue. This is not the only version of the first vision. There are a number of others they're mentioned by either Smith himself or by other prophets and apostles. And I'll just say in passing, as a rule, if you're doing some research into Mormonism or trying to write an article or minister to your Mormon friends or whatever, always prioritize sources that they would regard as being authoritative.
Right.
So if you have random Joe Schmo saying something about Mormonism, that's probably not something that's going to be persuasive to Mormons. But if it's like Joseph Smith or Oliver Cowdery, people who were really, really important in early Mormonism, they kind of have to deal with that. And so there are a number of people who would have known Joseph Smith and have authority in the church who said various different things about when this took place or who was there, where were they, all that kind of stuff. So, for example, Joseph Smith himself. One of the more interesting versions of this story was the first edition that we have. Now, this is really interesting to me. The first recorded version of the first vision is also the first mention of the first vision anywhere. It was never mentioned in newspapers or anything else. It was never mentioned in his journals until 1832. This is a big issue. This is supposed to be like 12 years later. And one of the things that Joseph Smith pointed out in his official record was that there was a lot of persecution that happened as a result of the first vision that he went around and told everybody. Here's the thing, though. Back in those days, the local newspaper was basically like your Facebook feed.
Right.
You know, if anyone had an issue with somebody else, they would write in and send a letter to the editor or something like that, and people would discuss this. Because especially if you're living in Palmyra, where everybody is on a farm and it takes like 2 hours to go visit your neighbors, you want something where everyone's looking at the same piece of paper and everybody's communicating. And so if there was somebody who was starting trouble or doing something that people didn't like, it was going to show up in the newspapers. There is no record in any newspapers of the first vision until after Mormonism starts. And this is, as I said, 1832. The church started in 1830. Yeah. So it's a solid 2 years before it shows up, and it shows up in his journal.
So what's interesting to me, too, is if you think about it, I would assume if the first vision actually occurred in 1820, and Joseph Smith has this revelation, which is foundational to Mormonism, I would argue then that Mormonism started in 1820. If he actually went around preaching about the first vision, because he's already preaching doctrine or teaching from this revelation.
By that point, something has been restored already.
Right. But
that's
there's nothing recorded.
And for comparison's sake, a little bit later on, he starts supposedly having visions that pertain to the Book of Mormon specifically. he didn't keep that one a secret. And people who lived around Palmyra or knew the family, even though he wasn't like blasting it from the rooftops, there were people who knew that he was claiming that he had access to the golden plates, or what they called the Golden Bible, aka the Book of Mormon. So people knew about it and people talked about it, and that showed up. Why doesn't this first vision show up? Well, I think the reason is because it didn't happen. And not only that, in this this earliest edition,
in 1832.
Yeah, in 1832, he only describes one personage. Now, to put that into perspective, if I had a vision of God, and the vision was of God the Father and also of Jesus Christ as two separate persons, I would include both of those persons in any description that I gave of what happened. That would be kind of a big deal to me. Or you can compare this with Paul's descriptions of seeing Jesus on the road to Emmaus, not the road to Emmaus, that was different. The Damascus Road. The discrepancies between his accounts are extremely minimal. It's like, okay, atheists in particular will make a big deal about his using one word that means to hear with your ears and another word that means to understand. And he's saying, oh, well, there's a contradiction here because he's saying that the guards that were with him heard Jesus in one account and that they didn't hear him in another account.
Hearing and understanding are two different things.
Yeah, those are two. It's totally easy to understand what Paul was getting at in changing the verbiage there, but that's also a really minor thing. If he had said in one account, I saw Jesus, in another account, he doesn't mention Jesus, but he mentions the Father.
That's a big deal.
That's a real big deal. And that would also indicate some kind of modalism, which is another big deal.
Right.
So yeah, this isn't something that's really easy to get around, especially since later on, you'll see there were presidents of the church, there were prophets who claimed that Joseph didn't actually see God at all in this vision. Wilford Woodruff, who, boy, that's a hard one to say. He said in 1855, he said in reference to the first vision, how did it come? By the ministering of an holy angel from God out of heaven, who held converse with man and revealed unto him the darkness that enveloped the world. The angel taught Joseph Smith those principles which are necessary for the salvation of the world. He told him the gospel was not among men, and that there was not a true organization of his kingdom in the world. The man to whom the angel appeared obeyed the gospel. This isn't talking about the later angelic vision where the angel tells him about the Book of Mormon. This specifically mentions that the angel told Joseph Smith that the gospel was not among men. That's not found in the visions concerning the Book of Mormon. That's found in the first vision. There are other accounts where prophets will say Joseph didn't see God at all, but he saw Peter. It's all that kind of stuff. Like, those are huge discrepancies, and we can't ignore that. How do you get around this? I mean, these people supposedly either knew Joseph Smith or knew people who knew Joseph Smith.
So what do you think the purpose is of even reporting a first vision 12 years later? Like, what's the reason? What's the motive behind the first vision account?
I'm not really sure. To be honest, it's a strange thing to me. I think generally people like Joseph Smith will try to give revelations in order to legitimize either their ministry or some command or some teaching. And we're going to see clear examples of that, especially when we get into issues of polygamy. But man, I'm not sure why he felt the need to come up with a separate first vision, other than, like, why not just embellish the vision that he had concerning the Book of Mormon?
Yeah. Do you think maybe it was to concrete the fact to maybe his followers in general and maybe potential converts that not only is there the Book of Mormon that gives revelation from golden plates, but he is also essentially a book that he receives direct revelation from God.
Yeah, it might have been something that legitimizes him as a prophet rather than any specific claim that he was making.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes
Maybe.
sense. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's all speculation, but it is interesting to think about, like, why 12 years later than the supposed first vision do you need to bring about some type of revelation? I would assume it's just to try to concrete or validify the fact, or bring validation to the fact that he says he's a prophet of God.
Yeah, I think that's at least a viable theory, and it's also interesting that the first, as I said, the first recorded version of this vision came in the form of a journal entry. The funny thing is, as any Mormon apologist will tell you, Joseph Smith was not particularly well educated. He had about the equivalent of a third grade education.
Yeah, I hear it all the time.
Yeah, and that's often used as evidence for the legitimacy of the Book of Mormon, where they're like, well, how could somebody who was so uneducated produce something so
refined?
Yeah, that's the word.
And it came to pass that the Book of Mormon was so refined.
Oh my goodness. You should try and read the Book of Mormon at some point if you're going to encounter Mormons. But my goodness, my hat's off to you if you do it. It's a hard book. It is not a fun book to read, honestly. I think you have to already believe it in order to enjoy it at all. It's so incredibly verbose. And it came to pass, I, Nephi, blah, blah, blah. It's rough. And we'll get it more into like the content of the Book of Mormon in a little bit. But yeah, so that's one of the issues, is that there are so many different versions of this account. There's also different versions with regard to when it took place. 1820 is not the date that he always set forth. There were different articles written over time dealing with the first vision, and in at least one of these, the first article that was written, it was a series that Oliver Cowdery did, kind of going over the early history of Mormonism, and in the first article that he did, he wrote that this took place when Joseph was 14, which is the official account. Later on, he says this, and this is like a month later in a subsequent edition. He says, "You will recollect that I mentioned the time of a religious excitement in Palmyra and vicinity to have been in the 15th year of our brother Joseph Smith Jr.'s age." It's when he was 14. That was an error in the type. It should have been in the 17th year. This would bring the date down to the year 1823. This is an interesting one, because he originally made the same claim that the church claims now, that this happened when Joseph was 14 in 1820. But then he corrected this to something that the church disagrees with, that it happened in 1823. 1823, by the way, is closer to the date of
revivals.
Yeah, the date of the revivals that Lucy Smith eventually talked about when
That's his mom.
Yeah, when she was giving her kind of memoirs and talking about this. She said it was 1824 or 1825. So that's pretty close. Like I would think that's probably actually either the actual date of this religious excitement or somewhere really close to it. And so it's just baffling that you go from, and this is the only time that they do this, by the way. There are other accounts where it says he was 15, other accounts where he was 16, so on and so forth. So when did this happen? Well, according to the official version, it was 1820, but according to church newspapers and people who testified to the Book of Mormon, it happened at some completely other different time. So yeah, you can see that there are all sorts of different versions. That's already a major issue with the first vision. And also, as we mentioned, that there was really no persecution, even though he claimed that there was. Nobody knew that this first vision supposedly had happened.
Yeah, no one was writing about it, like you said. The first very account didn't even come until we see it from Joseph Smith's own hand in 1832. No newspapers, everything was laid silent.
Yeah, and also in those days, everybody kept a journal. So many people kept journals. And we have a lot of those journals, especially journals of prominent Mormons. And they're not talking about this, not in the 1820s and not until probably the mid 1830s. So really, effectively, this didn't happen. And just the cherry on the top is that nobody in the Smith family acted like this happened either. This supposedly, again, happened in 1820, but from 1820 to 1828, Lucy Mack Smith, again, his mother, his brother Hiram, his brother Samuel, and his sister Sophronia, they were all official members and regular attendees of the Palmyra Presbyterian Church on a regular weekly basis. You would think, and I believe all these individuals eventually became Mormons. Like, they believed in Joseph Smith. I don't know about his sister, the very little set of his sisters, but they became members of the church and everything. Even Hiram was killed in the same way that Joseph was.
Right.
They were very devoted to him. Why is it that they were Presbyterians for this period of time when they supposedly would have known that they were not to join any of these churches?
Right.
So all of that leads me to say that the first vision almost certainly didn't happen. But you may be thinking, why does any of this matter? Well, I think if the first vision actually took place in the way that Mormonism officially says that it did, really the first strike in the conflict between Mormonism and the rest of the world came from the Mormons. Because as we said earlier, there was that personal attack against professors of Christianity, against the pastors and the reverends and all these kinds of things, saying, you are corrupt for teaching these doctrines of grace and of really the truth of who God is. You guys are the ones that are doing all these things. So I think that raises the question, if this didn't happen, and it didn't, where does that animosity actually begin? Because if you look at Mormon history, things get real hot real quick, and that's unique to Mormons. Like the other various Christian splinter groups and things like that, they didn't get treated the way that Mormonism did. People died. People got killed because of animosity between Mormons and everybody else. And so we can get into who probably actually started all this, unless you want to talk a little bit more about the first vision.
No, let's keep going. Let's go into who actually started all of this. I think you made a very good point in terms of the contradictions between the multiple first visions accounts, how we have no newspaper accounts between 1820 or even 1823 or 24 to 1832 or even later of the supposed first vision. Even his family, who became supporters of Joseph during 1820, 1832 or 1823 up to 1832, they were still in a mainline Christian church or denomination. And that's very interesting, because if he's out there preaching the first vision account to his family in 1820, they would have been like, we're done.
Yeah, especially if he was preaching to the extent that the people in the neighborhood were persecuting him.
Right.
And
he claimed persecution from him.
And like I said, all these people that I just mentioned, Lucy, Hiram, Samuel, they all became Mormons, and they never questioned it, to the best of my knowledge. So why are they going out to this Presbyterian church? I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. Continue on.
Okay. So I think the first real antagonist comes in the form of a guy named Abner Cole, who is sometimes referred to as, and I'm not making this up, Obadiah Dogberry. We were talking before we started filming about how these guys have amazing names.
That is pretty amazing.
Obadiah Dogberry is a pseudonym for Abner Cole. He was the editor of the Palmyra Reflector during the early days of the Mormon Church, and he did not like Mormonism at all. Since there really wasn't very much of a hubbub around Mormonism in the 1820s, around Joseph Smith or anything like that, when the Book of Mormon was initially published and Joseph Smith claimed to be a prophet of God, it sort of came out of nowhere. And so a lot of people started wondering, like, who's this Joseph Smith guy? What's going on with this? And So a number of different reporters and editors and newspapers started investigating. And what Abner Cole found out made him really not take Mormonism seriously at all. And he wasn't super nice about it. That's why he went to his Obadiah Dogberry kind of a persona. Yeah, he went to that whenever he was reporting on something that like he thought was just ridiculous. And that's not even really speaking loosely. He actually went so far as to publish a kind of satire of the Book of Mormon, like a couple of chapters of it, where he was just clearly mocking the Book of Mormon, just ludicrous kind of stuff. And there were reports that Joseph Smith actually got into it with Abner Cole, that there may have been fisticuffs involved. Because Joseph Smith was actually, he liked to wrestle. Just a fun fact. He was apparently a very talented wrestler. And this was apparently one of those situations where that came out. Well, Abner Cole published a series of articles from 1830 to 1831 talking about the Mormon Bible and also Joseph Smith. And one of the things that came out that I think turned him off initially and also created a lot of bad press, we'll say, about Mormonism was something called money digging. Now this one's fun because you can say, oh, well, the connections that Andrew mentioned in the last episode about how, Joseph Smith Sr. was involved in this cult and all this kind of stuff. You can say that all that's kind of tenuous or whatever. You can sort of dismiss that if you want to. You can't dismiss the money digging. Money digging basically worked like this. Suppose you were a farmer in those days. Farming it's difficult. And one of the reasons for why it's difficult is because you have to put a lot of money up front. You have to buy the land. You have to buy the tools. You have to pay for the workers. You pay for the seed. You pay for all these different things. All in the hopes that everything will go well, that there will be plenty of rain and sunshine and all these different things that your plants will need or that your animals will need, whatever. But at the time, things were not going well for farmers in the Palmyra area. It was a little bit rough. And so in addition to that, you also had a lot of people who were hearing stories about like buried treasures, especially Native American kind of stuff, because they were finding stuff like this all the time. They're finding burial sites and things like that.
Even pirate treasure, Captain Kidd's treasure.
Yeah, there were all sorts of stories of treasures that are buried right where you live. And so people naturally, they had on the one hand, the poverty that was driving them to maybe say, well, I think this is kind of ridiculous, but man, I don't really have a lot going for me right now. I don't think this farming thing is going to work out. Maybe it's worth just taking this little bit of a risk, paying a little bit of money. Who knows? Maybe we'll find something. You got that on the one hand, and then you also have all these stories about like buried Spanish gold and like El Dorado kind of stuff. I could be just one dig site away from being the richest man in the world. And, that's enticing to a lot of people. So basically the way it would work is that somebody would show up at your house and would say, I have this amazing spiritual ability. I can detect when magic has been used. And not only that, but I can see through stuff. And wouldn't you know it, I was just passing through this town and I just felt this strong pull to your farm and your property. I think there is buried treasure on your farm somewhere. And I can use my spiritual abilities to look through the dirt and to find where this treasure is located for a small stipend, which is reasonable. $10 a month. I can go all over the place and look on your property and try and find these things. And then, of course, like any con, you try to make it last as long as possible. But sooner or later, of course, you're never going to find the treasure, and you have to find some way to extricate yourself. That's basically how money digging went. You would come up with some reason, like you would find a spot where you would say, oh yeah, the treasure's right here. And then the person would start digging, and inevitably they wouldn't find anything, or maybe they would find something that you can use to be like, oh, okay, well, this is a sign that like the treasure was there. This was a piece of it. But there is a magic power protecting this treasure that's making it so that when you get close, it just magically disappears and reappears somewhere else. There was all this kind of stuff going on. And yes, absolutely, Joseph Smith was involved in this kind of process. And this has been something that was mentioned by a lot of different witnesses, many of whom are credible, very credible. There's one guy named Willard Chase who was responsible for building the case that the Book of Mormon was housed in while it was in Joseph Smith's home. And he was closely associated with the Smith family. He was like hearing all this kind of stuff about the Golden Bible and all this kind of.
I think that was their neighbors.
Yeah, they were really closely associated, and so they were like, Willard Chase had heard all these things about the Smith family being involved in money digging. Martin Harris said something similar. He's going to be important in just a minute. Joseph Smith Jr. himself actually said at one point that he was involved in money digging. In fact, this was in the form of this sort of FAQ that he sent out to the Mormons through one of his official church newspapers. And in Mormonism, an official church newspaper, that's as good as scripture. If it's something in the ensign or whatever, that's official, that's vetted, because somebody had to look at that and go through it and correct anything, and it doesn't get put out unless it's official. What he said was, it was a question and answer kind of setup. Do Mormons believe this? Answer whatever. And the question was, did Joseph Smith participate in money digging? And the answer, he said, was, yes, but I never made more than $14 from it.
So he's not a very good money digger.
No, he wasn't. Apparently not. He actually probably made a little bit more than that, but that's even still, it's an affirmation. So yeah, there's a lot of evidence, just so much. I talked earlier about people who had signed all these affidavits, and there was like 100 people who signed these things and wrote these things, testifying that yes, the Smith family in general, and Joseph Smith Jr. in particular, were involved in this practice.
Yeah. So what tools were used for him to try to find treasures essentially in money digging? And I want to mention as well is the group that left from Middleton, Vermont, the Fraternity of Rodsmen, which go under a few different names, like the New Israelites is another name for them. Also, Winchell, who was mentioned as the one who had the dowsing rod, he also was a fugitive escaping from the other neighboring county from charges of money digging in general. So there's lots of similarities and, of course, circumstantial evidence, best as it may be, minus the fact that Oliver Cowdery's family was members of the Fraternity of Rodsmen, were in Palmyra doing the same exact things that Joseph Smith Jr. was doing. That's how he grew up.
Well, I want to read the testimony of Willard Chase, because I think he gets into that issue of like what tools were used. Okay. This is an interesting little story. He said, I became acquainted with the Smith family, known as the authors of the Mormon Bible, in the year 1820. So that is one thing that actually did happen in 1820.
You know what I find interesting that he says there? He says that the family is the authors of the Mormon Bible. Yeah, that's an interesting. He doesn't say that God was the author of the Mormon Bible. Or he doesn't say that Joseph
Smith was. He says the family was. I think that's...
Otherwise, he doesn't consider it as a revelation.
Yeah. I don't think he ever actually became a Mormon. I thought he was just like, this stuff is...
I'll build the box. I'll build the box.
Yeah, like you've commissioned me to build a box. I will build the box for you.
Yeah. What's in the box?
He actually...
Little did you know the box from the movie Seven actually contained the Book of Mormon gold plates.
It's not commonly known, but the Book of Mormon is Gwyneth Paltrow's head.
Yes, in the movie Seven. What's in the box?
This got so weird so quickly.
Okay, anyways, keep going.
Oh, no, I'm fine with it. Seven references. We can't actually let people know that we've both seen Seven, though.
Nah, dude, it's fine.
We've seen like an edited version that's like 5 minutes long.
The Walmart edited version.
Or what was the like the VidAngel version?
Oh, the Mormon version?
There's got to be.
The Mormon version of 7 had the gold plates in the box. It makes perfect sense.
The Mormon version of 7 is 116.
Oh, ooh.
That's a reference to something that will happen later.
All right, keep going.
Okay, so according to, this is the testimony of Willard Chase. He says, I became acquainted with the Smith family, known as the authors of the Mormon Bible, in the year 1820. At that time, they were engaged in the money digging business, which they followed until the latter part of the season of 1827. In the year 1822, I was engaged in digging a well. I employed Alvin and Joseph Smith to assist me, the latter of whom is now known as the Mormon prophet. After digging for about 20 feet below the surface of the earth, we discovered a singularly appearing stone, which excited my curiosity. I brought it up to the top of the well, and as we were examining it, Joseph put it into his hat, and then his face into the top of this hat. It has been said by Smith that he brought the stone from the well, but this is false. There is no one in the well but myself. The next morning he came to me and wished to obtain the stone, alleging that he could see in it. But I told him I did not wish to part with it on account of its being a curiosity, but would lend it. After obtaining the stone, he began to publish abroad what wonders he could discover by looking in it, and made so much disturbance among the credulous part of this community that I ordered the stone to be returned to me again. He had it in his possession for about 2 years. I believe sometime in 1825, Hiram Smith, brother of Joseph Smith, came to me and wished to borrow the same stone, alleging that they wanted to accomplish some business of importance, which could not very well be done without the aid of the stone. I told him it was of no particular worth to me, but merely wished to keep it as a curiosity, and if he would pledge me his word and honor that I should have it when called for, he might take it, which he did and took the stone. I thought I could rely on his word at this time, as he had made a profession of religion, but in this I was disappointed, for he disregarded both his word and honor. And then he goes on for a few more pages, but I think that's sort of the salient point that Willard Chase had discovered the stone while he was digging a well along with Joseph Smith and his brother Alvin. And Smith immediately takes this and puts it into his hat and tries to look through it and claims that he can see stuff. Other accounts say that he was seeing, like angels and demons and stuff in the stone.
It's so weird to me because he accounts as 1827. So let's say the first vision happened in 1820. So the God of the universe endows Joseph Smith as a prophet in 1820. Yet in 1827, the prophet of God is now actually engaging in abominable practices according to Deuteronomy 18.
I think he was saying it was 1822 that this took place, but yeah, it's
still 2 years after, according to official stories, the first vision account, the prophet of God is now doing abominable practices. Let's not mention that the reason why King Saul was killed was because he consulted the witch of Endor, right? Like this is stuff we must take serious. When God commissions something, if he commissions a prophet, and if the prophet were to engage in these abominable practices, like that doesn't fly.
Yeah. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that the Bible does tell us what to do with a false prophet. And this is an issue that I've had in talking to Mormons, is that somebody would say that they reject a certain revelation, but not the prophet. What the Bible explicitly says in Deuteronomy 13 and 18 is if a prophet or somebody who claims to be a prophet teaches you to follow false gods, that is, teaches false doctrine, or if they claim that something is going to happen and it doesn't happen, that what you're supposed to do is you are supposed to reject the prophet. In the days of Moses, it was like kick the prophet out of town.
Kill him too.
Yeah, and to put it into perspective, when Paul in 1 Corinthians talks about the man who was in an incestuous relationship with his stepmother, Paul quotes from Deuteronomy 13, which is the one where it says, if a prophet teaches you to follow false gods, that you're supposed to reject them. He quotes from that when he says what to do. He says, kick this guy out, kick the guy out of the congregation. So when we hear about all sorts of things that Joseph Smith was doing, it isn't just an historical curiosity. We are trying to communicate to Mormons that they are basing their faith and their eternal destiny on somebody like this. The main problem with money digging is not that it makes Joseph Smith just a sinner like the rest of us. There are specific problems in Joseph Smith's character that will carry throughout the rest of his life, that are what separate him from, say, Jonah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Jonah, dude.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was just thinking about Jonah.
Yeah, that's often something that comes up when we start bringing up issues with Joseph Smith's character. Like
Jonah wasn't doing occult practices. He was running away from what God was telling him to do. He was not looking in crystal balls or looking at rocks and engaging in things that God calls an abomination. No, he was fleeing from what God called him to do.
Yeah, and I think there are basically three things that make Joseph Smith's character a problem for Mormonism. One is that he is inherently untrustworthy. Money digging was a lie, and it was a lie designed to get money out of people, often who could not afford this. This is similar in some ways to modern mediums and ambulance chasers and people who are like, oh, you have just lost your child. Your child has just died. I can communicate with them for a price. That's horrible, and it's also just flat out wrong. If you see any of James Randi's videos, like, the guy's not a Christian, unfortunately, but he has made a life of talking about mediums and spiritualists and things like that, and how it's so easy in many cases to just prove that these people are liars. Joseph Smith was lying about his ability to see into the ground and see treasures. Like, this is an issue. So if somebody's established as a liar, as somebody who has done this for many years, why in the world would you want to put your faith in that person for the fate of your eternal soul? When Jonah sinned, he sinned because he went against what God had told him to do, but he wasn't lying. He wasn't doing this kind of stuff, like he said. Similarly, when Moses hit the rock instead of speaking to it like God had said, he wasn't being dishonest. He was going too far. He sinned because God had told him to do things this way, and he decided on his own volition not to do that. But this isn't something that would make me say, oh, okay, well, maybe Moses isn't all that trustworthy. All this stuff screams to me that Joseph is not a trustworthy person. The other thing is a lot of what he did was straight up blasphemous. And blasphemy is not a word that we use very often unless we're using it kind of flippantly. But all blasphemy is elevating the creation to the status of the creator, or denigrating the creator to the status of creation. This is when we use the name of the Lord in vain, we're taking the creator and denigrating him to just an obscenity. And that's wrong, and we shouldn't be doing that. What Joseph Smith did in a lot of cases was to claim that his own words were the words of God. And that is absolutely 100% unacceptable for anyone who claims to be a man of God at all, much less a prophet. And the other thing, the big thing, he was unrepentant. He would say that he was a sinner or whatever, and that he had received forgiveness, but he wouldn't repent of his money digging. He didn't repent of his polygamy. He didn't repent of the false doctrines that he taught. If that had been the case, I think we would be singing an entirely different tune here. But he kept up with it, and that led to his destruction. And, of course, that leads us to his first major court case, one of many.
Wow.
Yeah, he was actually in legal trouble as a result of his money digging. He encountered a man named Josiah Stowell. And Josiah Stowell was in his mid-50s when he encountered Joseph Smith. And he was a landowner in Harmony, Pennsylvania. He had some kind of connection with the Smith family. I wasn't really sure what exactly it was, but he came to Palmyra to visit with people there, and he ran into Joseph Smith, who claimed to have this ability to see into the stone and see all this kind of stuff. And so he said, I've heard a lot about this Spanish treasure on my property, somewhere around my property. And I would love for you to come and visit me in Harmony and use your powers to come and help me find this stuff. And Joseph's like, well, if you're going to pull my leg like that, I guess I'll do it.
Sounds like the beginning of a Marvel movie.
Yeah, it's sort of like, this is the beginning of his adventure. And then there's like an inciting incident and all that kind of stuff.
He's the Silver Surfer.
This is Act 1. Yeah, this is Marvel's Phase 5 plans, by the way, is all Mormonism related. So in any case, they agreed to this deal where Joseph Smith would be paid $14 a month, plus room and board, in order to help Josiah Stoll find his stuff. This digging process was actually initially funded in part by a man named Isaac Hale. That'll be important in a minute. And what Isaac Hale had to say was this: young Smith gave the money diggers great encouragement at first, but when they arrived in digging near the place where he had stated an immense treasure would be found, he said the enchantment was so powerful that he could not see. They then became discouraged and soon after dispersed. So what he's saying is that there was a date when they were set to start digging. And when they actually got to the place on the date, Joseph Smith said, I can't see anything because the enchantment is so powerful. So everyone just got discouraged and left.
So there's an enchantment around the silver.
Yeah, exactly.
So the silver's there.
The silver's there.
There's just an enchantment.
I can't point to the specific location. Sorry, guys, we got to go home. And like I said, like you got to keep up the con for as long as you can.
Yeah.
So this became an issue. Ironically, Stoll never actually lost his faith in Joseph Smith. He never stopped believing in his mystical powers and actually became a Mormon.
He became a Mormon, Stoll.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Much to the chagrin of some of his family and his neighbor. Stoll's neighbor, Peter Bridgman, had Joseph arrested for being a disorderly person and an imposter. And this was his first arrest of many. He couldn't really do very much in his own defense. Josiah Stoll actually tried to defend him and say like, oh, Smith is such a reliable person. But during this court case, Joseph Smith actually did admit to money digging. He tried to minimize things as much as he could, but there was only so much you can do. I mean, everybody knew what he was up to. And Stoll himself was ready to admit that this is what was happening. The outcome of that court case, though, is disputed. Oliver Cowdery went out and said that Joseph Smith was acquitted, but the court records actually show that he was not, that he was actually convicted of this case. I think I'm inclined to agree with the court on this one, that they actually did declare him to be guilty of being a disorderly person and an imposter. And this became his first major problem. And this, as I said before, this led to Abner Cole declaring him to be a liar and an imposter through the Palmyra Reflector. So this followed him the rest of his life and unto today. So that's money digging for you.
Dang, man.
Don't go digging for money.
Don't go digging for money. Don't claim that you have powers to do this, and then work in a contract agreement with somebody for that in order to find it, but then not.
Don't contract with somebody to do something that is literally impossible.
Yeah. Wow, man. Joseph Smith's story, and we're not really like diving super deep into it. We're going pretty deep, but
there's
the main focus again is we're trying to build the beginning of the foundations for you to really understand what drives a follower and a believer of Joseph Smith's revelations to commit the acts that were actually committed in this book. Meaning as well is that the foundations of Mormonism, I would actually argue, do not condemn the murder that those actually took place here. The foundations of Mormonism do not condemn the murder of the mother and the
we're
baby.
Actually going to get more into more violent aspects of early Mormonism in subsequent episodes. But I think for now, the key is that Joseph Smith didn't have to be an honest person in order for people to believe him. And somebody like Josiah Stowell, he had to have known on some level that Joseph Smith did not live up to the promises that he made. Smith said that he could find this treasure. Stowell never got the treasure. This should be a really straightforward thing, but I think it goes back to some of the stuff we talked about in the last episode about this really being fundamentally an issue of our condition before God without Christ, without the Holy Spirit living within us. We don't want to believe the truth. We're not truth seekers. We naturally want to gravitate towards a version of God that we find to be palatable. Josiah Stowell found a version of God that he could accept. And it was through Joseph Smith. It wasn't like he was trying so hard to find the truth and just couldn't quite get his head around it. No, he wanted to believe Joseph, and he did.
Wow, that's an interesting thing to think about too. It's like Joseph Smith was not. It wasn't new to him to have people believe in him. Right. Like even if the first vision account didn't happen in 1820, didn't happen in 1824, what we see is prior to the Book of Mormon, we actually have people believing and putting their faith in him and his revelations in the form of looking for money.
Yeah.
But the question is just like the Book of Mormon in his money digging, was the Book of Mormon not actually ever there? And also with the first vision, did it not actually ever even happen with him finding golden plates? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this raises the question of what do you do when somebody claims to be a prophet and doesn't live up to their promises? Later on, when we get to the Laffertys, it's like they have this like low view of what a prophet is supposed to be, which is ironic because they will imbue a prophet with all sorts of powers and responsibilities that they don't have. But the issue is like when this person makes a promise in the name of God or declares something in the name of God and it turns out not to be true, there are a lot of people who will just continue on believing for reasons that I'm sure God knows and they know, but the rest of us are kind of shaking our heads like, what? Why is it that when the prophet Onias, who will you'll find out about later, when he makes a prophecy that doesn't come true, why did the Laffertys not just say, okay, well, we're done with this, we're out of here? I don't know. Yeah. But that's a part of just the fabric of Mormonism, really.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here. This is a second episode on this series on Under the Banner of Heaven. It's been great. Ryan, thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
Next time, we're going to dig into the Book of Mormon itself and go from there and see where we end up. This has been great. Yeah. And again, thank you guys so much for watching this. Thank you for supporting us. This is not possible without you. God bless. Have a great day. Hey, guys, thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content just like this on a weekly basis, please go to thecultistshow.com and consider partnering with us. We need your support in order to create this consistent content, guys. Please, again, go to thecultistshow.com and click partner with us and donate and help us to continue this ministry.